the depreciation of the USD itself. So it's a steep goal, and I will kind of show you what that would mean. Yeah. Everybody so far with me, we only covered slide 1. 4 more slides to go. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so where are we in comparison to the world? Is in the world. The richest one is actually per capita is Switzerland. Today it's about $112,000 per capita. Singapore is not far behind, roughly around 107,000 USD in today dollars. And we have just, as we learned a few weeks ago, that crossed over the 5,000 mark. Yeah. And if you look at what the World Bank data projects, at the current growth rates of these countries and the depreciation in the dollar, Sri Lanka might actually, even if we stay the course, we will reach around $33,000 if we stay around 5.5% growth rate and the depreciation. But Switzerland is going to be around 350,000. Singapore is around $250,000. So the gap is huge. And if you think we are having a problem in smart people leaving the country now, look at the chart. You will all have to hooked up to some machines to transfer your knowledge and work because we won't have any people. So this is a huge gap, but there are many countries the size of Sri Lanka with the type of resources of Sri Lanka which have done it. And so I wanted to share that with you in the next couple of slides. So how did it come? Like, we were all kind of like, in 1960, you can see, like, not that far off. US was $3,000 in 1960, Sri Lanka $150. So there was a little bit of a gap. And anyone want to make a guess as to how fast the growth rate, annual growth rate of Sri Lanka versus US or Singapore? Next slide is that, but I want to make you guess. What do you think? The growth rate of US is 5 times the growth rate of Sri Lanka? What about Singapore? No guesses? Okay, I'll show you this slide. Actually, it's very small. So here's the growth rates over, if you take the 60 years between 1960 to 2020, and you just average the growth rate of Sri Lanka or Singapore, Sri Lanka grew at about 5.5% annualized. Singapore grew at about 8.5%, 8.6%. Switzerland at about 6.7%. So if you look at it, it's only a 3%, percentage difference, but over a 60-year period, compounded, it makes for a huge difference. And the other case is, because they're so far ahead and still growing at that rate, they're just gonna explode. Right? So this is a good lesson to us to learn. That many times I have this conversation when I say 40,000, people are, God, this guy is crazy, never gonna happen. Right? But if I look at, if you look at this, 5.5 to 8.6, significantly possible. Next slide, please. I know I have 2 minutes. Okay, so this is the difference between Sri Lanka and Singapore. Between 1960 to 1980, Singapore had roughly 12% growth rate, and Sri Lanka had roughly 3% growth rate. That 20 years, just right at the get-go of 1960 to 1980, just pushed Singapore really fast. After that, it has been growing at about like 6-7%, about 7%, but that is still good because the jump start is huge. In fact, for the first 10 years, it had about 18% growth rate, which is, quite. And have you heard like Asian tigers or Irish tigers, or the economies described as tiger economies, like Vietnam, China, all of this? it's a period where their economy is growing roughly about 10%. So about 10-20 year period where you can grow at about 10-11%. And that just changes the dynamic of your growth strategy itself. So what we are discussing in this book is how do you capture and create that 20-year period where you just have a significant amount of growth that allows you to capture that space. Next slide, please. One. Okay, so you might ask me, we are pretty happy. We are, at least the people in this room are seems to be doing okay. We had beautiful BMIC, air conditioning, all there. Well, there's a slight problem coming our way, and it's not going to stop because we are late on it, and it's called climate change. The current projection, we've already passed the 1.5. We are going to roughly about 3% or above by 2100. That would have essentially 19 million plus Sri Lankans living in all the hotspots in a very, very difficult situation. So I think I'll stop there. I have a couple of more slides and we'll get to them later. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sankar. Next up, we have Member of Parliament Kabir Hashim. He's former Minister of Highways, Higher Education and Investment Promotion. For full disclosure, Mr. Hashim was also part of creating the blueprint for the Southern Janbala area. And on the 11th of April 2026, he was appointed as the chairman. He used to work very closely alongside with Mr. Ram Vikramatne, who is now the chairman of the Transformation Committee of Sri Lanka Cricket. So having said that, I want to hand over to former Minister Hashim to talk about our subject matter today, Sri Lanka 2048, Developed Nation, Deferred Promise.
Thank you, Shamil. Madam President, my colleagues in the panel, Dr. Tara Dinel, and all the other distinguished guests who are here. First of all, I'd like to apologize about the delay. I'm very sorry about that. I was trying, Asanka was very imaginative in 2048, and I tried a bit of his imagination, thinking there'll be less traffic on the road. Didn't work. So sometimes imagination is dangerous. I think imagination, people who have imagination actually build countries, and people who don't have imagination just find excuses. So I think you need a bit of imagination to go forward. People in Singapore built a developed country from swamp, and in Dubai they built a developed country from sand. And in Sri Lanka, I can't imagine ourselves growing. We have one of the most literate populations. We have gone through some of the difficult times, and our population has survived it. And I'm sure we can think about achieving what Asanka has been saying. It's not only a dream, it's not only imagination, it is a possibility. But how do we get there? I'm going to talk more as an economist rather than a politician here. So, going by purely per capita income, sometimes it can be misleading because there are countries which have high per capita income but huge inequality of distribution of income, poverty levels, etc. Right? So we have to make the assumption that with growth comes equality and distribution of income, etc. Now, according to the World Bank data in 2023, it was assumed that a country would be called developed, or what you would call rich, if you had a per capita income of something like $13,845. At that time, Sri Lanka had in 2023 something like $4,000, so we were far below the standard. And if you go to 2048, if you adjust, as Asanka said about nominal income, etc., if you adjust for inflation by 2048, then the threshold for a developed country, for a country to be rich, you would have to have a per capita of around 17,000 to 20,000 US dollars. So at that time, we can think about 40,000, good, but if you get to 20,000, you're going to be rich, you're going to be there. But how do you do that? Sri Lanka has a population, according to demographers, we have a population at that time in 2048 about 25 million. So you have to take that into consideration. And at this population level, to pass through our threshold, we have to have our gross national income, which is $90 billion. We have to move up to $400 billion. So that's the challenge. So to do that, to have a per capita income of $20,000 and a GNP of around $450 billion, we have to work at getting to keep at an annual growth rate, as we've been talking, of 8 to 9% every year. Can we do that? Now that's a big challenge. How do we do it? Because in 2030, if we want to be rich, at 2030 we have to have a per capita income of $8,000. So that's, to get there, we have to have an annual growth rate of 9.5%. But right now we are at 4%, 4 to 5%. So we are far below the standard, which means by 2030, if you're not going to reach the standard, then we're not going to make it later on. So we need to start thinking. Historically, Sri Lanka has exceeded 8% on and off, sporadically, but not regularly. 1951 to 2023, if you look, the average growth rate has been only 4%. And that's not good. That's 4% is normal. Sri Lanka just grows at 4%. You have a government or not, it still would grow, I think. So essentially, we have to have adopt suitable policies and strategies, especially to reach these rates. And while it's extremely challenging, it is possible because countries like Korea, which were poorer to us, Singapore, Taiwan, they had consistent growth rates of 7 to 9% right through 20 years. So this is not magic, and you need to make some changes. So work on our physical capital, human entrepreneurship talent, and high tech. Now these put together, all together. In order to have this consistent growth rate, we have to have an annual investment rate of GDP. Because you can't get growth without that. And that should average something like 40%, 35 to 40%. Sri Lanka's average investment to GDP has been in the last 20 years around 27%. So we have about 12% shortage of investment. Once in 2017, we had investment to GDP of 39%, almost 40%. In 2025, last year, our investment to GDP was 35%. But these are like odd years. It's not consistent. So how do we get that investment consistently to keep up that growth? These are the challenges. Our comparative breakdown of investment to GDP is also an issue. We have domestic private investment, which is the highest, which is about 27%, but our FDIs, and it's shocking, is only 1.1% of GDP. That's where we need to move to get that confidence level of investors, and that we have a lot to do. Then we have a lot of other economic factors to get right. The incremental capital output ratio, which is very high for Sri Lanka, we need to bring it down from 5.5% to 4%. That is capital utilization. Our capital utilization is very low because of unproductive projects. We have debt-funded investments, wrong priorities. Then we have governance issues, administrative irregularities, poor procurement processes, corruption. With all this, people don't, even the investment that's coming in is not utilized to the maximum. So to do all this, we have a whole lot of issues. And I think the way forward is, an export-driven economy. It's very clear, but what kind of export-driven economy? Are we competitive in today's context? Thing is that the global value chain and the export basket is changing. Sri Lanka hasn't adjusted itself to that. And we need to do a lot of things, because if you look at from year 2000, if you look at the main 3 products that have been exported in the world, in Asia, from Asia, there have been automobile parts, mechanical, machinery parts, etc. And countries like Korea, Malaysia and Thailand are exporting like 40% of their GDP goes as those exports in those industrial products, intermediate products. And Sri Lanka is doing only about 5%. On the other hand, Sri Lanka has not changed its product range. not gone into complex production, and there are ways of doing it. And that's, I think, if you move to that change, the dream that Asanka speaks about is possible. It is definitely possible. Policy consistency, export strategy, governance, a lot of things. So I think I'll stop at that, because normally a politician doesn't give up the mic easily, and I think there was a time limit on my speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kabir. We now move to hear thoughts of Shehara Silva. Shehara is an international communication specialist with over 40 years of experience in media, marketing and strategic planning and advocacy. She also sits on boards of various organizations in Sri Lanka as well. So let's hear Shehara's thoughts.
I'm going to come from a slightly different angle on this. Much as I respect both Kabir and Asanka, and I do really admire the fact that we're looking at a single-minded goal, really. The center of this conversation is about how we amplify our per capita income about tenfold, from $5,000 to $40,000. And in any management theory or anywhere, there is the idea of a big, hairy, audacious goal being central to how you vision and you onboard a nation. My experience both in working in the region as well as the brief stint I did decades ago when I was trained in FDI strategy in Ireland and worked in the BOI. I'll try and bring a couple of those, but particularly I'd like to throw in a few ideas based on what I did to help Malaysia, I believe, in certain areas, and a couple of big ideas, I believe are big ideas, which are still low-hanging untapped fruit for Sri Lanka. So I'm going to start with a little oddball quotation from Shakespeare. There is a time in the affairs of men when taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, the voyage of their life is bound in shadows and miseries. So today we are sitting here, presumably, to seize the opportunity to be Pollyannish, if you wish, and think big, and not necessarily go down all the doom and gloom. They're there, Kabir, they're very much there. But if we go into between the war, between El Nino, between everything else that we have to deal with the failed state of democracy in this country, we will not be able to vision anything. So leaving that aside, I'd also like to make one little aside related to both of you having such a dream about Singapore. Having worked in the region, and I would say that about particularly the Ranil Wickremesinghe regime, where there was this huge aspiration of trying to be another Singapore. We do not have the same Chinese grit. We don't have the same kind of everybody dancing to one drum. When I was decades ago asked, given the choice to go and study Singapore as a model island, I said, I think we're closer to the Irish. Some of us are dreamers, we're impractical, we don't necessarily all dance to the same drum. So we have to keep that in mind in terms of the fact that we are not an autocracy, and Dubai or Singapore are not necessarily examples of how we can manage our flawed and fraying system. Saying that, there's no quick fix in crisis of implementation that this nation has had. There are many good plans, but we have some serious issues to face with. As much as we have a demographic dividend at one level, we thought, we now have huge issues related to a demographic handicap. We have already nearly the largest, one of the highest dependency ratios in the world. That is people who are under 15 and people over 60. By 2048, it's going to be huge. The median age is going to be 47 years old, right? And 25% of our population are going to be over 60. We're a country where we retire people at 55. So it's a huge issue where you're going to have almost 50% of your population, in one of these two ratios, either geriatric or still at what you call underage work. So we not only have to go 10 times faster, we have to do it with possibly 50% of the population. And on top of that, we have ratios related to women's participation in the workforce, which I challenge and think is highly understated. And we're not trapping the right figures, because the sectors that have it, like agriculture, like domestic labor, where women are working, are not really being factored in. But leaving that aside, we have to factor that in whatever positive sort of rosy-tinted view we have of how we're going to get there. Let me give you a few ideas of where I think the low-hanging fruit lies. One definitely is, and something I've mooted for a long time, is to position Sri Lanka as what I call a brain port. Our competitive advantage, and I have been a competitiveness consultant, and I have helped set some of these scenarios up, which have proved fruitful in Malaysia. Here, the Education City, the initial concept papers came from me, and we did bring in some big players like Cambridge University and several others, and it is a success. I think we could emulate it in many ways, or better it. We have the human capital, and if we were to use education and get proper offshore campuses here, and stop the brain drain that we have in terms of what apparently is right now. The figures are not finite, but I'm actually reading some of the data of Dhammika Pereira's policy paper. But he does say, and because the UNP 2030 vision is slightly different on the numbers, and I think the SJB figures are slightly different, wherever the projections are, there is an issue related to about $2.5 billion going out of our kids who go out to study. Now that's not a bad thing. I'm a firm believer that the more we have diaspora going out at high caliber, in the long term, like if we were to leverage it like how India did, we wouldn't have an issue. India has a whole strategy called brain gain from the diaspora. They don't see it as brain drain. And they have huge programs in terms of both absolute visa-free process for anyone who's Indian origin, right, to various other perks that they give to make sure that they plow back in. We have a dividend in the fact that with the economic collapse, we had a better end of professionals going in. It's drained us at one level, but it has helped us at others, because that's part of the inflow of capital that we're now getting. And we can maximize on these things. So one of the issues that we would have to do is then to leverage on the head start we have, where we were the first country actually in the region, as much as we opened up our economy, in terms of allowing universities from the West or wherever on Asia to actually issue degree certificates at a tertiary level from that country. So you have, for example, I'm on the board of IIT, which has helped so much in creating CEOs for the IT sector. And they gave a University of Westminster degree, which is branded UK. We don't have to go to the UK to get that degree. Now we have so-called twinning programs, which are slightly different, but be that as it may, we still don't have proper offshore universities here. And again, Malaysia is getting about $4.5 billion to $5 billion in from that sort of thing, on top of maybe a 2.5 billion brain loss in terms of the dollars that we lose of our kids going out. We should be able to leverage that easily. We also need to ramp up the number of doctors we have, because part of this is we're going to have an aging population. We've already had a brain drain. And again, we are just about to produce nothing more than about $1,000 doctors to $1,400 doctors a year. And I would recommend that we follow the Cuban example, which we could. And they have one of the highest ratios of doctors to citizens. We have about 1.1. Cuba has about 8. And I would suggest that we have a huge plan towards ramping up doctors, nurses, and that caliber of people. So the numbers, if you look at it, is trying to go for about 7,000 doctors a year, to go for about 100,000 nurses, to be able to handle both our aged care as well. So you have to look for partnerships within that. NUS could be one, which is from Singapore if you wish, where we could bring down good training facilities and really give the incentives towards it. We have to perhaps argue with the IMF related to the fact that there has to be a fair policy. Other nations around us are giving tax holidays. We don't have to passively agree to everything they say. If we have a rational basis, And we have professionals who can articulate it well in terms of competitive advantage and the necessity in a certain growth curve. IMF, I'm sure, will listen to it. We just haven't had the caliber of people to be able to argue and articulate sensible policy with proper comparative studies. I won't go into too much more, but I'm going to just toss in maybe one more radical idea. So I'm jumping away from the sort of scaling up in the value chain that we have to do, with particularly emphasis on particularly using the services sector and using education and creating Sri Lanka as an education hub and doing the comparative advantage of us over India and really looking at people who are looking at the Indian market. Some Indians also find it difficult to go to the West, set it up in Sri Lanka, it is easy and so on. But we also look at what Kabir brought up related to the Gini coefficient and the poverty disparities that we have. The last 40%, we really have to find a huge multiplier. And much as we say about agriculture, it's a long haul, it's not going to happen in the real time we need it. And it's quite problematic if we have to maintain certain environmental standards. Fishing, yes, fishing has greater, and no one's really looked at it adequately, but fishing in the export sector has huge potential, and because of our seas, there is some potential there. But I want to throw one more radical idea in and stop, and that is to really look at what was, and this is something I suggested to the ILO decades ago, and again, sadly, it was never picked up. But at the moment, we have about 1.5, 2 million people on Aswasimo or whatever it is, and we're giving a dole out, and we have no control of it. However much we say, it will be politicized. What we could do, and this is a bit draconian, and it is somewhat of a sort of Singapore playbook, perhaps we could insist that every government contract that is given, that a quota of it, say for example, if Abans is given to clean the streets as a municipal contract in a public-private partnership, that the people who are on the dole are given the priority related to X amount of community service and hours that they have to do. So they are prioritized in terms of work. There could be sensible programs like that, where we stop this system of just ad hoc welfareism, where everybody thinks that the government is beholden to look after them till their kingdom come, as we get free education and we get free healthcare, that they also have to be paid if they do nothing. And we have to stop that because productivity has to be increased. So I'll leave that, but perhaps one more idea. The big elephant in the room is productivity related to government. 1.5 million government servants, one of the most bloated government sectors in the world. I'd wager if anyone has a carriage, 750,000 of these people have to be reskilled. I would suggest that you take a good part of this, at least starting with 10-20%, create an independent audit system in which they would really look. So you set the thieves to catch the thieves, as it were, because they understand the system. And we have some kind of independent audit outside ministries and outside government bureaucracy, monitoring productivity, KPI, and outputs of these institutions. At the moment, most of the government data, especially the soft data, is rubbish. It is not correct. I have personal experience of embedding people into government ministries when I was on the USA project. I can tell you they're invented by ministries at an ad hoc level, where a minister will come and say, and it's just changed, okay? So that's how it's done. So the TVEC sector, the productivity outputs, training outputs, everything is totally invented. We need to validate figures. On that, I stop.
Right. Thanks a lot, Shara. Me being the devil's advocate today here in this forum, I think I would ask some tough questions as to how are we going to achieve these objectives. It looks well and good, looks hunky-dory at the moment, Asanka and Kabir and Shahara, but I have some questions for you, as I always have. So let's start off with Kabir first. Now, Asanka's book says the colonialists may have divided us, but after over 70 years of independence, we could no longer blame the colonialists, the founders, the politicians, and others. We own these challenges and the responsibility to fix them. Now, Kabir, we know this government came into power with the status quo stating that the 76 years politicians who have been in power has dragged us down to this point in time. So my question to you is, how do you think, with the current status quo, this government being in power, the objectives that you spoke of, is it achievable?
That's a tough question. I said I'm going to be an economist here, I'm not a politician, but I need to answer some of the questions. Okay, from 48 to right now, 76 years, I think all governments have done quite a lot of good. Sri Lanka has moved, I think the colonials actually did a lot. They built our railways. I probably wouldn't have even built that much if not for them. You need to look at the positive side. But from 48 up to 60, Sri Lanka grew rapidly, especially with the Korean War boom, and we did extremely well. We had a surplus, we were doing well. After the 60s, we started dropping because we were not diversifying. And as Shehara said, one of the biggest mistakes was in the TVC sector. We needed to skill people to make it industrial. That was the time Korea privatized their training and skills development. And they did a huge number of upskilling their people. The private sector moved. In Sri Lanka, we were very leftist regimented. We didn't want the private sector. It was government training, and government training was typing and cookery and cake making, etc. Right? The BTA and all that. So we didn't move into the higher skills. We didn't have the attraction, and then we started getting into a deficit with the GDP, etc. But from the SLFP government and the UNP government, there were policy differences, and both governments have done some good things, some bad things. But the whole thing was there was a governance issue during that time. We have to admit that there was a lot of wastage, there was some amount of corruption, etc. But if you look at the growth, if you look at, for example, the 2001 UNP government talked about massive reforms. It was very difficult reforms, politically unpopular. That was stopped by the opposition. So it was this political thing, because at that time we realized that there was a debt issue. We raised the debt issue and said we will get into a debt crisis and we have to start changing. And there were some huge policy differences, especially what we are thinking now of revenue, the IRD being restructured, the customs being restructured, the power sector being restructured, the CPC being restructured. 20 years later, we haven't done it. Why didn't we do it? Because it was stopped. So these 76 years, I don't buy that argument. I really don't buy it. There was a lot of movement. Well, the JVP government has come in now. Now there is an opportunity. Again, can they move out of populism? Because all our governments have been working to try and, at elections, satisfy people. I was in India 2 days, till today. And the new chief minister promises he's made, I don't know how he's going to do it. Free buses for all women. He has said on top of it, free buses for men also. Free, no tickets. They are selected buses. Then 3,000 Indian rupees per older people, and crazy. So handouts won't work. Then the reforms. If the government can actually make those hard reforms, they can make the change. And in a sense, this government has the opportunity because they had control of most of the trade unions. Let's be honest. Most of the governments before couldn't make policy decisions because the trade unions stood up, went on strike, then they withdrew. This government, I think, has stronger potential to make some harder decisions. This is an opportunity. And how they would engage the opposition on this. Because I've seen in most countries, the opposition and governments sometimes work together. I don't see that in Sri Lanka. You always look at political infighting, etc. So it all looks at how they look at it anew and position themselves to work with other people who have other types of policy thinking.
So if you look at the last 30 years, 3 decades, Kabir, we've seen opportunities for Sri Lankans to come together. I can name a few. 1996 World Cup, when Sri Lanka emerged victorious and we won the World Cup. That was a time that Sri Lankans could have united. We didn't do it at that time. 2004 tsunami, Asaka mentions that in the book as well. We could have united. We didn't do that at that time. 2015, there was a good governance. You were also part of that government, Kabir, alongside with members of this audience today as well. What happened? Nothing. 2022, there was a change of heart of the people of Sri Lanka. They went on the streets, protested. 2025, we saw a new government coming into play. With all these reforms that have taken place in Sri Lanka, do you think 2048, the money that Asank is talking about, 40,000 plus per capita income, is far-fetched?
40,000, I don't know, maybe a little difficult, but as I said, you can be a rich country at $20,000. You don't have to get 40 at once. Once you're at $20,000, you hit the developed country status, right? So that's good enough. And if you look at the growth rates, we have to move from 5% now to 8 to 9% consistently. And that is not impossible. That's why I think it's not impossible, provided either the present government or the next governments don't move out of a consistent policy steps that they come together. And if you look at the reforms, there was one thing, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, as president, he brought the economic transformation bill. We were in the opposition then. We did criticize the bill in some aspects, but overall the bill was excellent. To achieve this export target and to go to this 8 to 9%, it included setting up the new EPZs, private investment into that, trade facilitation, bringing more investment. All the issues that we had with the export sector would have been addressed. But it got stalled, government changed. I believe the present government is looking at amending that bill and coming back with it. So if they follow suit, and if they also work with the opposition in terms of implementing national policies, I believe that it can be done. And in the change of government, that we follow the same thing. So there are a few things like education and few political measures. Can I just say one point and then finish?
Yes,
one of the
yes.
things that keeps driving in my head is about this. I have lots of young people who come and ask for jobs. And when I ask their parents, they say, we are going to send our children to university. And I ask why. They say, sir, it's 4 years of free education. And then after 4 years, we get a job. So why shouldn't, I said, don't do it. Put them into some technical training and they get paid well. No, but then here I get a government job. So when we promise every graduate a job, how can we get skilled people into the technical sector and how to upskill our people? So those key issues are political decisions. Will this government have the courage to take those decisions?
But Kabir, you would have noticed Minister Lalkant has already said that giving free jobs in the future for the graduates who are passing out won't be a feasible option. But I want to pick Asanka's brain on this. Now, Asanka, you spoke about countries which are quite developed. You spoke about Singapore. I want to talk about China as well, because if you look at their growth rate, it stands at 5%, even below Sri Lanka. But the size of the country's economy is very big. We're talking about approximately $20.4 trillion economy compared to Sri Lanka. So in your opinion, how do you think this 40,000 per capita income that you're talking about is feasible? Why? Because even Kabir spoke about Ranil Wickremesinghe's reforms that he brought in the year 2001. He brought in another set of reforms for the year 2030, which says 20,000. So you are projecting something way beyond that target. So tell us how, as a nation, we can achieve this target.
Thank you. How are you guys holding up? This is a lot of things going on. I just want to check in if everybody's still awake. Yeah, I got a thumbs up, so that's good. I actually think we are looking the problem backwards. The reason you mentioned many instances we didn't come together, because why should I care? The average income in Colombo is 100,000 rupees. You can't even live here. A rent would be 35,000 rupees at a minimum for a room. So the reality is we have not created any kind of economic situation in wages, in real wages for people to live. So why should they care? And they are traveling 2 hours from Homagama to Colombo each way, working 10 hours and getting back for 100,000 rupees, right, a month. That's $300. No, I am honestly grateful for people waking up. In California, you wouldn't even wake up for that amount of money. So the joke, I'm sorry to say, the numbers you are saying, the failure we had is not a political issue. It's our goals are too low and it will not trickle down to the vast majority to have any benefit. Sir, you honestly talked about inequality, GDP. Sri Lanka is one of the highest inequal, so we are poor and unequal. So why would the poor people care about what you guys are talking about? Because they do not see any growth in any of these things. So if you do not get to 20,000 or 40,000, the chances of us actually motivating the people who really need to go study for 4 years or do technical training to grow, there's no opportunity for them. And I actually disagree, Shahara, about the government being overbloated. The reason government being overbloated is what exactly this sir said. Because as a politician, your job is to essentially serve your community. And if a member of the community comes and says, sir, I work for you, I try to elect you, so now help me get my son into a job, absolutely, so you have to do it. Otherwise, he's going to be kicked out of the election next year or next election. The point is, the reason we are looking backwards is how many of you know what is the current GDP is? Total GDP is about $180 billion last year, 2025. How much of it is coming from the private sector? Any guesses? Actually, 100 billion is essentially 100 billion is private sector, 8 billion is government spending for military and administrative services. So all this focus is on the $8 billion. Where is the focus on the $100 billion? Can anybody tell me what is the growth rate of the 289 companies listed in the stock exchange? Even the total valuation, the revenue. Our private sector is not growing fast enough. So it's not absorbing the 350,000 kids that are born every year. So the government has to take them into jobs. Otherwise, you're going to have a fight and people are going to get kicked out of their seats. And it's a very hard job to be a politician. No joke. I have utmost respect for anybody who's wanting to do that job. It's a very difficult job.
It's very clear that you don't want to do it now.
No, but my point is that we are looking it backwards, right? We are focusing. There's a saying: if all you have is a hammer, everything is like a nail.
So I can give you a classic example, Sankar, with the experience that I have. See, we always say as a nation we have to stand tall. We should not think about other countries, other nations. We have to be patriotic and so on and so forth. But this is not a game that we can play alone. We need the support of other nations. We need the support of everyone around us. But don't you think that's important moving forward?
I think we have tremendous support. Japan, India, the whole region, has supported us. We are sitting in a building today that was a gift, I think, from the government of China. Is that right? The BMICH? Yeah. So we've had not only now, but we've had for, at least for the entire period of our independence, lots of gifts, lots of friendships from a lot of countries. We've essentially, maybe not taken advantage of those things, but I don't necessarily see that many countries have been super hostile to us vis-a-vis other countries. Each country has to look after themselves, and in that friendly competition, we've had many friendship donations from Japan, I think, that we haven't even used.
Shahara, Asanga spoke about the private sector contributions. If you look at the predominantly the last 3 decades in Sri Lanka, the garment sector was booming at one point. However, now most of the garment sector in Sri Lanka have set up shop in other nations, contributing to those economies rather than our economy per se. Then if you look at the tea industry in Sri Lanka, it has been hovering at 1 billion to 1.5 billion US dollars. And when we speak about liberalizing the country's tea industry to make it a $3 billion, $4 billion industry, we don't do it. So don't you think that this situation where private sector companies are moving out of Sri Lanka is also a factor that is affecting the nation? Because if you look at the current corporate tax level stands at 30%. If you look at the US dollar rate against the rupee right now, it's at an appalling state, sliding even further. So what is the incentives do you think that the private sector in Sri Lanka should have to make sure that this growth levels that we are projecting at this forum today is achievable and attainable?
First, I'd just like to respond to Asanka. I agree with you first about your big hairy goal, right? I think it's very, very possible, and I think that the issue is that because our GDP is so small, to do quantum leaps is not difficult. You need some big investment coming in, and then you just see a huge amplifier. So it's not this slow and steady kind of 8%, 10%. You do a couple of quantum leaps with some big investment, and I'm certainly suggesting education as well. To come to your question, again, I'm going to give you a slightly, this is a slightly less, this is more bleak answer. I don't think the government sector has done well ever. Because at the lowest end, and the problem is like our IT sector, right? We don't have a single unicorn. Our policy was geared generally towards things like call centers in the garment sector. We were good Girl Scouts. We basically got contracts with Marks and Spencers and Victoria's Secret and everything. And they told us how to do a panty or a bra or whatever it is. And we did it like that. And we said, yes sir, no sir, 2 bags full sir. When I was in Ireland and I looked at the strategy of how they used multinationals and they scaled up, I want to cry when I say how much I begged and pleaded with the government sector to look at some of the strategies of working with government related to policy change and skilling up, building brands, and really creating value creation. We did very little of it. We have 1 or 2 things that we've done in terms of textile, in certain innovations. But again, we didn't leverage the patients or anything. So government sector hasn't, and then because of poor policy planning, there was a flight of capital with the economic collapse, right? But even tax rates, while I weep that as a sort of semi-retired person that I'm paying tax on tax, right? The flight of capital, if my son pays 45% on his income in the UK, right? High tax is not the issue, right? It's that you're not only paying those taxes, you don't have any policy at the baseline where you're starting, right? 100,000 is not a baseline in terms of saying tax-free. It should be 500,000 at least at the current cost of living, and we need to get there. So the imagination that and the risk appetite that Sri Lankan private sector has is minimal. Comparing it to what I experienced in terms of the caliber of businesses out in East Asia, we don't have any companies with, dare I say, I'm going to use a crude term here, with the balls to really take companies and brands out. One of the few brands which is gone and built a global brand in ways in the tea industry. It's stronger, though may not be in value to Akbar Brothers or anything. By a quirk of fate, and perhaps because there was some family connection, they got $3 million once to build an international brand. We have no funds, no seed capital to scale up. That's what's happened even with the IT sector. They're struggling at C-level sort of seed capital and stuff like that. Nobody's scaled up. Nobody's able to do it. Virtusa sold early, it got Indianized. Millennium IT sold early. We don't have, even in the IT sector, which is possibly the best of it all. There are 1 or 2 innovative companies like Haley's, particularly under a different regime, but still, that did innovation, true innovation, with Heycar, with a few things. And again, we didn't facilitate them and really push them to go out fast enough. I think that's one few companies that still has some technology and some differentiation. And perhaps even, I don't know whether there's anything else. We could, for example, even in tourism, we're pushing and pushing for more tourists, which is rubbish. We should go up the value chain because we don't have the infrastructure. We should look at Maldives, which is an income which is far greater, and go for that. We could go for arts and culture, we could go for sports tourism, but we need to drop the numbers and get people who are now spending $300 a day apparently, right, to something near $600 or $1,000, near what the Maldives is doing.
So I want to open the floor for questions from the audience as well. If anyone has a question, yes, Dr. Sarah. If I can have a mic, do we have a mic? Yes, it's just on the way. A couple of seconds, Dr. Sarah, please, in the front row. Dr. Sarah is the executive director at one time at the CPA. Now that position seems to be vacant as well, no, Dr. Sarah?
No, it's not.
Not yet. So you're still there. Right. I saw an advertisement on the papers, by the way. Okay, right.
When he or she takes office is a different matter. Anyway, no, what I wanted to say, we have a lot of panel discussions and all of that about our and our current situation. But one thing that happens in these panel discussions is that we're not going to talk politics. We're going to leave politics out of it. And I just like to remind people that, when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, he called it the principles of politics. That brings me to my next point. What is the role of India in all of this? India is going to be, or is, the third or fourth largest growing economy in the world, and by 2030 it's supposed to be the third largest economy. Tamil Nadu, despite what happened yesterday, or because of what might happen in the future because of what happened yesterday, is going to have a 1 trillion economy by 2030. What does Sri Lanka do in relation to all these developments? Because we do know that in terms of the growth rates and all of that in India, they are being spearheaded by the states of South India. And if India ever goes into the whole question of delimitation, you will find that the states in the north and east of India will get more seats than the states in the south of India. And the arguments, therefore, of confederation, not secession, confederation might yet rise again. So what I'm asking you is this, is that, before we got our IMF deal, we got $4 billion from the Indians to bail us out. I think it was very well known that if for whatever reason the Sri Lankan government failed to stop Prabhakaran in the north and east, India would have stopped it. India's best relations are with Sri Lanka in the region. Now, if Tamil Nadu is going to stride ahead of everyone else in terms of the Indian Union, what will the north and east of Sri Lanka do? We know we have 7 MOUs signed between President Modi and Prime Minister Modi. We don't know what the substance of those MOUs are. But will the north and east of Sri Lanka serve the large, growing Indian economy? Is that the way of injecting cash into our economy? And if that happens, what will the rest of Sri Lanka do? Is it going to scream and shout about economic stability and scream the horse? Or is it going to join the party? India is going to be, after all, a big factor going up to 2048. In addition to that, people did mention, we are an aging economy. We are an aging economy. And we also have to face the challenge of AI. Put all of those things together. Where are we going? We have a government today that is basically, in my opinion, practicing state capture from below, in a way perhaps that other governments practiced it from above. Prajashakti, Clean Sri Lanka, all of that is all about a cadre-based alternative to government. When the IMF deal expires in mid-27, we need to have national elections by 29. Between mid-27 and 29, what is the development policy of the government of Sri Lanka? They will probably have to go back to the IMF, and there will be pushback. Let's hope it will not be that.
Right. Kabir, you don't have to answer the political questions yet from Dr. Sarah, but the important point that Dr. Sarah pointed out, India's role in the country's economy. If you can elaborate on that, and then I'll give Asanka also an opportunity to talk about that.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. That's an excellent question because that's something was in my mind and in my framework. The first thing is we need to go up the global value chain in terms of production to get things right on trade facilitation processes, the Madrid Protocol. There are so many, like those things have to be put in place in the transformation so that we are ready to be a merchandising export country. Now, we don't have two files. You're on point. Right now, we can just ride on India's growth. That I would think is one of the easiest strategies. Hong Kong to China, Sri Lanka to India, the same thing. We can just grow on India's back. So if you look at India, by 2047, they are planning to be a developed country in the sense that they are trying to achieve a $20,000 per capita income. Right? So 1 year before us, because they gained independence a year before us. So we can go in parallel. They are hoping to grow at 8 to 9%, which they probably will do because of Tamil Nadu leading the growth. And Sri Lanka can become partner in this growth for sure. And our market, if we have our SME, our local, you spoke about, Asanka, about the private sector, that it's not doing enough. The private sector can't depend and survive on this market. And this is a very small market. On top of that, our people are taxed heavily. Their usable income is very limited. So that means the consumer market is dropping, and you need to go into a bigger market. India is hoping in 2030 their middle class will grow to 715 million people. In 2047, it will be 1 billion of a middle class. Just imagine that market. All we have to do is get into some intermediary product. As if my colleague Harsha was here today would have said that the iPhone is made in 40 countries and Sri Lanka doesn't build even one component of it, but it's built in 40 different countries. All we have to do is just chip in on one. That's the global value chain. So for India's automobile market, we can be just building one small component. That will move us up. So that 8 to 9% Asanka's dream is not impossible because a few changes. And you're also right, without this political part, nothing will work. I didn't want to bring politics into this debate here. I didn't want to sound like a politician, but the politicians need to make those hard decisions. They need to get their national policies right and bring things together.
Asanka, your thoughts on this very quickly. Yes.
Malik, can you play that other slide? I knew you were going to ask this question. I came prepared. I was reading your mind. The next slide after this. That one. Okay. Everybody get the point? The world divided 4 billion in that little white part and 4 billion in the rest of it. And we are right, we are 5-hour flight from more than half the world's population. If we can't figure out how to get our economy growing, shame on us, nobody else. So coming back to this, India is of course a big part of this, so is China. But I kind of disagree on this idea that it's a free ride. There's no free ride that we are going to get. I'll give you an example. 25 years ago, when I think cars from Hyundai and Kia showed up over here, everybody was laughing. Yes, nobody would buy a Kia or a Hyundai because the Toyotas and the Honda are better, and also the European cars were much better. Today, it's a very different story. So we are somewhat arrogant. We want to start Kia today. We want to be in 1 year where Kia is today. That is not going to happen. So if you want to get into these markets, you have to have an idea that it's going to take about 20 to 30 years to get in there. And you have to, our private sector, you're so right, sir, there's no disposable income in this economy for private sector to grow. But that means the burden is on the executives of those private companies to figure that out. It's their job. They are paid a lot of money to figure out how to get to these markets, how to enter them. Yes, and go hammer all these politicians to get the support you need. You know, their phone numbers are on the website. Call them every day. Sorry, sir. But my point is, that is what an executive is in the private sector. It's their job to go figure this out. We have to get their growth rate right. And India or China is not a free entry because, you know, we are friends. We have to provide them good services. You are absolutely right, sir. In Tamil Nadu, you have 50 million people aging and getting richer. To me, that's very exciting. That's 100 million hip replacements or knee replacements. How many doctors do you think you need? How about dental checkups? But we are so arrogant, we want to be the cardiologist. No, I don't want to do dentistry for the Tamil Nadu people, but I want to be their brain surgeon. No, that job is already taken by Singapore and Dubai. Nobody rich enough to go outside is going to come to Sri Lanka to do brain surgery. But we could get dentistry, we could get knees and ankles replaced. And that's a lot of money. And maybe in 20 years, we will build enough trust with these people that they might actually give us a lung or two. Yeah. So my point is, this is not a free ride. It's not like you can enter at high level. We have to build our industry strong enough to be competitive. And as politicians, sir, please, you also have the numbers of all the CEOs of the companies. Call them and say, where's the 10-year plan? Where's the growth rate? How are you going to take 350,000 people into jobs? Because otherwise I have to take them and give government jobs.
Politicians call the private sector and ask them questions on this. Private sector will have a ton of questions to the government sector as to how they are managing their KPIs and so on and so forth.
I think
Next talk.
Absolutely, that discussion needs to happen.
Yes,
It
yes.
cannot be just at the
Absolutely.
Chamber of Commerce one day having a big presentation.
Right. So, Shashara, very quickly, yes.
Yeah, a couple of things related to your question. First, I think let's start with free trade agreements. Done on Madam President's watch, I think almost 25, 30 years ago, and I was part of that BOI team. It's 0.24% of GDP, right? It's been a failure in many ways because of the para tariffs and everything else. So unless we use Big Brother and ask them nicely to at least play ball properly by certain rules, we'll be, we have to get the services set up, we have to push the free trade agreements. But I think the way to go as a small nation, as an island nation, is not to keep, sort of putting too much pressure right now on the private sector. There is a role they have to play more aggressively, but it is tricky, partnerships, and I will say that time and time again, right? A part of us as islanders, yes, we're driven slightly different. So let's go the top-end strategic partnerships, bring in the skill set, bring in the capital we need, and grow. So to do that, if it is in services, if it is in FTAs, we have to bring the right kind of investment. We brought in investment like the steel industry on the early FTA, rubbish which was polluting. We didn't bring in the medical institutes, we didn't bring in the learning institutes. Rajiv Gandhi, one of his greatest contributions to South India was really the IITs and the conversion to English in terms of IIMs. 30 years ago, we got the first approval of an IIM. I went personally to the board and they said Sri Lanka would be the first country to do the offshore one. And then, as usual, government toppled everything easy. Berkeley University, a few years ago with Maruto University, signed a strategic partnership. Again, the country bungled in terms of being able to send a response. And we have top-end diaspora who were pushing. So whatever we do, decision-making is now, but we have to unleash some kind of entity, perhaps like the Malaysian model, that's the one I'm familiar with, where perhaps there is an entity with some government equity, which then looks at investment, but operates not on the kind of procurement rules and the kind of guidelines of government, but works. So that's how Malaysia has pushed it. I don't know what the rules are, but you have to go with a much more private sector driven rule base with investment and capital, and we can get the funding for that if we do it. There are other things, of course, we're resource rich in terms of minerals and graphene. There are things which we don't have the money. We have to bring in the partners, then the quantum leap will happen.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, wait just a second, the mic is on the way. Here we go.
I think writing on India is another thing, but building our own capacity in terms of entrepreneurship and having our individuals investing in our young capital, that is important because we need to make an industry that gives incentives for social enterprises. And we have brilliant young minds, but right now the taxation is high and these individuals are looking to leave. So what can we do about it?
Cheryl, I think you can take the question because you spoke about a brain gain, the Indian concept, how it has worked quite well for India at this point of time. So for Sri Lanka, how would that
So
work?
one of the issues is we no longer have development banks, we don't have venture capital. When you had Ayojana, Iran, you know this, right? When NDB was there, there was a scaling up of SMEs. Now, the model we have is that the so-called pro-poor banks, among Sarvodaya Development Bank, technically it's supposed to be pro-poor, but we are borrowing from fat cat commercial banks with huge margins, and then we give to the poor or to the small MMEs and SMEs at much higher rates of commercial rates. So earlier we had low-cost funding. Then we had companies like Ayojana that actually went to venture capital, which is not just giving funding, it gives management skills, it trains people, stuff like that. There's none of that really. Now you'll have tokenism, some private sector companies put up a fund and they give you $100,000. What can you do with that? You can't even buy a car, right? There's nothing. So unless you're going to give $10 million or something and ask someone to start something, we're just fiddling around with, sort of notional things, just set up a GRI report for an annual report and feel good. But it's rubbish.
Any other questions? Yes, we have a few questions. Yes, Kabir. Until the mic goes there, we can just say.
I still think that, whilst we're working on the Indian market, building our own entrepreneurship definitely should happen because they are the ones who service in that market. So one of the things is that you need to have this proper trade policy in place that will give opportunity for our entrepreneurs to work, and they be supported with the HASCCP and branding at international level, the Madrid Protocol to take up branded products and be recognized. But the most important thing is about capital, because there's the issue of capital. So our capital markets should be well developed, and there should be less rigidity in the share market, the stock market, where lots of small SMEs can't get listed because of that. There are so many conditions. But if you allow those SMEs which are export driven to have the opportunity of being listed, then they can get into the capital markets, get support and grow. So there's lots of changes that need to come in the infrastructure there. So these are all, like that's the thing, the government has to have a consolidated strategy. It doesn't mean you do one thing, it has to go in sequence, but that's too much to discuss.
Yeah, but Kabir, you would agree that Sri Lanka has success stories like John Keells for that matter. They started off as a tea brokering firm, and today look at where the companies, look at companies like MAS for that matter. They started off with a few sewing machines. Today they're a 2 billion turnover company. So there are success stories in Sri Lanka. So let's.
I thought with the change of government, the corruption will be reduced. But I find that there's corruption both in not only in the government sector, even in the private sector, even the banking sector. At least that is in the Nation Trust, NDB, and there was a major corruption there. I think about talking about developed nation 2048 is a dream. With corruption might reach gargantuan proportions in 2048 when it comes to Sri Lanka.
With your permission, I would like to pose that question to Iran. I don't know whether Iran would like to take the question. Based on public discourse, I think I'm just going to take the liberty to hand over the mic to you to respond to this corruption and this recent 2.5 million US dollar issue and all that. With your permission, if you don't want to take it, you can always talk, but I know that I've known you for the last so many years, we'll take that.
I can't directly comment on it for the reason that I don't know all the information. But I would say this, financial scams, right, are really a global challenge at the moment. I've just been spending a little time in Singapore trying to figure out how they are kind of handling it. So that challenge is there for sure. Which means that people are using the system. The corrupt are always there. It's not that they're using technology. They've always been there. And they're using the technology. And so on one hand, you have those who are corrupt. On the other hand, you have people who have to take responsibility. And I know a distinction between the two. So we can't have older people like myself, sitting on boards and sitting on audit committees and risk committees and operations committees and human rights committees, right? And not really asking the right questions. The responsibility will lie with that generation, if you're sitting at the top. So I think I'm distinguishing wherever these incidents have happened. Obviously, smart people have used the system and broken through. But then those who are responsible, right, should make sure that the systems are in place and the people are in place. And some things are basic. People are focusing on technology. The question I ask myself is, go to the fundamentals. You see, whatever systems you have, human nature is such that there will be corrupt people who try to figure out the system. So basic things, even when you're recruiting somebody, background checks, very, very fundamental and basic things, have they actually been done? Because you may be recruiting some of these people into the system. And then also having a very practical approach. Scanning centers are being set up everywhere. Right now, I can hire a room, get 25 people. They can be from Sri Lanka or they can be from Southeast Asia or one of these countries. I go, I can get 25 SIMs, I can give the phones to them, and they can easily operate in Sri Lanka. Some countries you can't do it now because you're only given one SIM. And then they go into the details of actually checking who is actually taking it. So some of the issues that we are facing, I think, at a practical level. The systems are not really strong at a practical level. I think you will find lots more of these coming. Few have surfaced, and lots more of this might surface with time, unless the people wait to put the systems in place.
Unless they're in Singapore.
No, I'm not. I don't generally refer to countries because
unless they're in Singapore, because I'm referring to 2050 Central Bank bond controversy. Unless they're absconding. So.
No, but I think the lesson that came up here also is that every country is unique in our political system. You can't divorce the political system from the economic system. But there are lessons and best practices in different places. And I'm one who thinks that copying is okay, provided you can do it better. And this idea that we have to innovate everything and reinvent the cycle, to me sounds ridiculous because we are going to be getting left behind.
Thanks a lot. We have another question from the audience. We have a few, yes.
I have a question because I want to diversify these conversations because we are talking about 2048. But if the mother or father put a child to the school and then move to the university, and the expectation to the child to become an engineer, maybe a business, MBA or something, and going under an organization to become another employee, what is the purpose is there? So my concern is we should have attitudes changes. There must be an attitude revolution in place. If an MBA person or business person or the engineer or the doctor, why he can't have his own business?
So,
manufacturing.
Yes, let's take another question and then let's try to couple it. Yes.
To achieve the ambitious political economic targets, we need to get the political mechanism right. Right now, the way we have this political mechanism has worked very badly during these 76 years. To overhaul this system, the biggest defect I see in the political mechanism is the inability of the government and the opposition to work together. What are your comments with regard to that?
Right, so first, you can answer the question.
I'm going to take both questions.
Yeah, and then I'm going to get to Kabir also about the opposition because he's a sitting
So-
member of parliament now.
Yeah, so great question. Anybody thinks can you tell me the GDP growth in US in the last 4 years? How many trillions of dollars of new GDP did the US create in the last 4 years? US economy grew from $24 trillion to roughly $28 trillion per year in the last 4 years. Anybody here agrees that the US political system is working very well within the country? So my point is, sir, every country will have periods where their political economy or political parties may not work together. But our economy needs to be resilient because of the economy. So if we don't build our economy to be resilient and strong and growing and diversified, then there is no, it needs to be strong enough to withstand sometimes the difficulties of the political parties or the political system. And that is what I'm trying to say by saying we are looking this backwards. We are always looking at the politicians, blaming them for what they have not done, all of these things, including corruption. Every country has corruption. We discover it, fix it, like Minister said, we move on. Sri Lanka is $100 billion plus economy. That means every single day is $300 million. So when we mess up a day, a lost revenue is a significant amount of economic output. And to come to your job, attitude problem is not the problem. Like this lady said, the challenge is the reason that person doesn't go and create their own company is there's no capital investment. You cannot be realistically competitive when Silicon Valley is spending $100 million for seed capital, and you are trying to get from NTB 100,000 rupees to start a company. How are you going to compete? So the best chance for your son or daughter is to actually get a job, get an education so that their skill set is developed. Get a job so that their experience is developed, and have as a parent to create the attitude so that those two things can come and flourish together. But
so
it's not the government's job also.
Right, Kabir, a very pertinent question in terms of why isn't the government and the opposition not working together? We have seen this many a times. If you look at the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, we saw the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, and then we see right now what's going on with the current government and the opposition criticizing almost everything. So how can we achieve all these objectives when there is political tug of war within the ranks in the parliament itself?
I'm not trying to jump the question, but I think you should turn the clock back and ask that from the present government. Honestly, because for the last 20 years, there have been an opposition group, small but very, very strong on the ground, and never allowed progressive policy. Stopped it by violent reactions. In 1981, J.R. Jayawardena invited Toyota, Mazda, and Honda into Sri Lanka. They protested on the road and chased them out. You would have had that. I said the global value chain today. Thailand is the 10th largest manufacturer of cars, automobiles, in the world. Vietnam is the second largest exporter of cell phones in the world. That was the change we could have made, but because of these political clashes, it happened. I also blame ourselves that we are still not maybe cooperating enough with the government, but it has to be reciprocal. And we can't also agree on the wrong policies, right? So it has to happen. You know, actually I used to tell Mr. Sajid Premadas that if he did become president, that we should go in for a national government. That we'll never be able to get this country right without a national government. And we kind of thought about it. And I was hoping that our president, His Excellency Anukumar Dissanayake, would do the same if he came into power. But they got such a resounding win. I think they would have thought they don't need anybody else. But now, if you see, it should be at one point, if Sri Lanka needs to get out of this, there has to be some kind of coming together politically on policy. Tough question, tough, no answer. I can't give you an answer yet because some of us like to work like that. But not everybody on both sides are built like that. But I'd like to tell just one thing, the two questions that came from the two gentlemen before about this banking sector and the corporate sector. That's one of the things I agree with you all. Yes, why should a young person not be able to come up? Why? That's because that's a mafia. There is the corporate sector. You talked about John Keells and Aries and all these big companies, right? But most of our policies are influenced by these big companies. And that's one thing you need to break because these policies must go beyond to allow young people to come into the market, right? And that hasn't changed. And the banking sector has been mollycoddled. The banking sector has exploited people. In 2022, Honorable Iran can remember when we were in Parliament, Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe, we kept telling him that there were super profits made by the banks and the primary dealers on that, where they were paid 30% interest on the super bonds that were issued. For 20 years, a few billion rupees every year is going out to them. And we said to tax that, but they didn't do that. So governments we thought this government will do it. It's not come. So we are thinking that we have, the party I represent, that we have to have a radical policy change. The way we are thinking, that we have to think differently. Because the old framework of economic policy has failed in the West. You're talking about the US having high growth rates, but the US economy is in a shit place. Right? They have a huge debt ratio to pay. UK is not doing well. The European markets are falling. And we are not going to follow those models. We need to build our own model like the Asian countries have done. And that's the change that we need in this country. Politicians have to think differently.
I can contradict and agree with you. So yes, I agree. You didn't get the memo, Sangha's memo related to stop looking backwards, and we're doing quite a bit of that. We can't keep doing that, but just on the mindset issue, I think our universities are not necessarily producing the right caliber of people for sure. I'm a product of this country. My entire education has been here, but I would think I'm an outlier, right? Partly because I have English language and that has given me greater exposure through literature and neuroscience. Rajiv Gandhi did the right thing. If you have to look at emulating countries, what he did has created English language in the South, which is why the GDP is so much high. And to some extent, the conversion out back to single only was a mistake. We all know it. Let's not go there. All we have to do is accelerate English language learning. Our teachers are paid something like $45,000. Servants are paid more than that. We need to just double the income of teachers, skill them up, accelerated. Again, I'm sorry to give you examples of what I've done, but it's easier to talk from knowledge. Created a program called SETTLE, which is social equity through teaching and learning English. We got the interactive learning system, so digitalized South India's curriculum. And we also got CFBT, who were the literacy partners for the UK. So high caliber people, right? And at the moment, we are today looking at a program where we are looking at digitalization giving us 10% of GDP, according to Hans's and the so-called GDP vision. So it is possible that with digitalization and accelerated immersion English, which is what SETTLE was trying to do, where we get 100,000 teachers and we create these tutories that, because it's free to AI, it's in the newspapers, curriculum content, immersion English, we get our English up and running with teachers who can teach it properly, and schools can teach it properly. We need to get the science labs going because we have far too few schools with science labs, so we can't go to STEM learning. We know where the problems are. We've got to fix them one by one and fund them. And then we have to look at the sectors that are terribly broken, and plantations is one of them, the industry. it's almost like the cotton industry. It is archaic, its labor problems are huge, it is a broken system. There is almost a 95% victimization of women. Women are more than 50% of the workforce, but there is no Kankanis or very few Kankanis who are women. It is utterly broken and archaic, and this is in the 21st century. So we've got to start somewhere, one thing at a time, without waffling on about what's wrong, and fix a few broken taps at a time.
So we'll wrap up in 8 minutes. So yes, I'll take that question as well.
Yeah, hi. I think quite often there's quite a lot of discourse in terms of overemployment in the public sector, but I also see that we usually tend to skirt around it. I do agree that there is overbloating, but I also see that if we were to go down the reskilling route, you're effectively creating a period of time where there will be a surplus government will almost immediately have to deal with. And with the current capacity that we have within the country, you're effectively also saying, listen, we can't immediately take in that many unemployed people and then also be able to sort of provide for them. How, as the government, would you sort of break out of that cycle of perpetuality that you've built there?
Right, so I'll take another question from the audience and then I'll try to couple it together.
I would like to ask this question.
Yes.
We are talking about an export-driven economy. Last few decades also we were talking about the same thing, an export-driven economy. So countries like Sri Lanka, what we do is we sell raw materials to Europe and other developed countries. What they sell is they sell brands. In other words, we sell raw materials to them and they sell brands. So in addition to that, I would like to ask this Mr. Kabir Hashim, former minister. He mentioned about the opposition parties not supporting the present government, and other countries also, some governments are working with opposition parties for the development of their countries. But do you think that this country's opposition parties responsible for bankrupting this country? They are the part and parcels of bankrupting the country. Like that, oppositions like Sri Lanka, can the government get the support of those opposition parties who are completely responsible of bankrupting the country?
Right, so I'll take another question also.
So they were talking about last year presidents, October presidents, December presidents, and January presidents, and next year May presidents. So how can I rely on them? How can they run the affairs of the country? That's my question.
Right, right. So I'll take one more question. Shanuki, please, you can, yeah. Right on to you. Okay. Yes, you. Yeah. Okay.
Good evening. So my question is relative. So I think the truth of the matter is that business in Sri Lanka functions in spite of government. But my question relates to the fact that have we as a nation and as policy builders given enough thought to the economy as a brand, make it a marketable proposition in the world? Yeah, I don't know if we have, because going on from what this gentleman said, I think we're kind of in the loop of still being more commoditized than value added. So my question is, how much of thought and effort is going into making the Sri Lankan economy, giving it a value proposition, which then can be marketed out there in the world, attracting FDIs, even attracting corporate capital injection?
Right, so let's take one question at a time. First, let's move to the gentleman's question about is the opposition going to work with the government? What is the thinking behind that? Let's start with you and then we'll gradually move on to the other questions as well.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm sorry whether you misunderstood that, whether I said we are not willing to work with the government. We have been very willing to work with the government. When the country was collapsing and Basil Rajapaksa was the Minister of Finance, to go to the Hansard, Iran, myself and Harsha clearly warned on November during the budget debate. We gave timelines and said, if you don't take these steps, we will go bankrupt after January. And we told them the correction measures. They laughed at us. It was because we thought about our country. We didn't care that they'll pull it off, but because we realized it. The same way in this government for the past, and when Gotabaya Rajapaksa reduced the taxes, the first month of parliament we raised the issue and said we're going to collapse. So not because we wanted power, but because we were doing our job.
We are doing the same thing with the JVP government. We are telling them where they are going wrong. And they are very antagonistic. When we tell that, they think that, they say you guys don't have the brains. Like you said, or the opposition crashed the country. You make that assumption. In 1948, when Sri Lanka got independence, we were one of the most illiterate people. We were one of the poorest countries. And if you look at I can't remember the last governor, the British governor, when he wrote the report, he said that the majority of the people are in poverty. But after 48, the Galoya project started, our agriculture expanded, our agriculture production increased. We did more projects, more than the King's times, from 48 up to now. Free education was brought in, our literacy levels, it opened up. All these young people from the villages today, who are secretaries or who are some are ministers, are because the access was given. If you look at the health sector, we talk about Sri Lanka being poor, all of that. But you go to the US and stay in a hospital and try to get in, it will take a couple of hours, days or months for you to get a thing. But in Sri Lanka, you can walk into a hospital, you'll be treated. Right? We should be proud of our country. The last 76 years, we've done enough. Our export to GDP was 30%, which is like a developed country in 2005. Our revenue to GDP was 20%, which was high, very high. All our economic fundamentals are right. Do you say that we bankrupted the country? No. Therefore, I don't accept it. Not from a political point of view, but look at the sense.
Right.
You can play politics on the stage. So therefore, we are willing to work with the JVP. But the JVP also, the present government, has to also then think about getting our views, discussing it. We might agree on some, we might disagree on some. We are willing to do that. But that has to come also from the government. The other question was about
Capital infusion.
Yeah, there has been corruption. Even in the government that I represent, there has been corruption. I'm not saying no, but that doesn't, you can't generalize and put it on everybody. Just because there has been corruption, there's always in this corruption, or people are talking about it. But I wouldn't say the whole government is corrupt. That's not fair. There must be good people in the government. There must be bad people, the same in us. So you need to, that's why we brought in all these, the CIABOC, the new corruption laws are brought in. Now it's very stringent. It's getting limited. It's changing. And the question about
capital infusion, FDIs flowing into the country.
No, branding Sri Lanka. About branding Sri Lanka, yes, that's very important because Sri Lanka needs to, now Sri Lankan tea is a brand. Sri Lanka's Blue Sapphire is a brand. Sri Lankan cinnamon is a brand. Only we have this stuff, right? And Sri Lanka itself, your question is right. Branding it, not by giving tax concessions. You can't bring in investors for tax concessions. Policy consistency, rule of law, good governance, democracy, right? And we never spoke about racism, ethnic problems. All the time we have ethnic problems. People are going to invest everywhere those issues, right? And you told Shami you missed something, opportunities. The biggest opportunity was 2010 when Mahinda Rajapaksa won the war. He could have united all the ethnic groups in this country. We would have gone to another level. Instead, we went on another path.
So I must say that during the time of the central bank bond controversy, I interviewed Iran and Harsha, and they were very clear saying that there was a issue with the government at that time and accepted that there was a mistake. So kudos to you all at that time because you all were the only people from the government who said so, saying that there was an issue. Another question I would like to take. Yes. Yes, I'll come back. I'm just trying to give everyone an opportunity. Also, the organizers tried to get someone from the government to be present on this panel today, but unfortunately none of them accepted the invitation. I know Dr. Dimel tried her very best at the last minute at least to get someone, but unfortunately. So most of the questions that you are directing should be directed at the government, but we are trying our best. I think the panelists are trying their best to, answer as much as possible. Yes.
So I'm a 25-year-old entrepreneur, and you did mention about the importance of involving the private sector directly. And I think Sri Lanka is far from such conversations as a representation of the youth. So I have a two-part question. Number one is access to VC-related funding in Sri Lanka has been extremely difficult. I started hustling when I was 18, and getting access to it was very, very hard. Not because of my age, and after that because of the accessibility of the BC funding alone. Right now I have funding line from, again, private sector of the country, from St. Anthony's Group, which has been amazing. But how is the government looking, moving forward, making this infrastructure around VC and angel funding? That's the first part. Second part would be incorporations and fintech as a whole. So most of Sri Lanka's tech sector as a whole is web shops. These are services to countries outside of Sri Lanka. A lot of foreign income comes in from there. But the fintech landscape in the country is very stringent. PayPal does not exist. We freelancers, entrepreneurs, digital entrepreneurs, we find it very difficult to bring US to the country. So I heard that PayPal is coming to Sri Lanka. I don't know how true that is, but I have had to incorporate in UK and in Singapore as a result. So that is unnecessary tax to other countries, right? So how is the government looking to create maybe different infrastructure around this and make it easier for youth like us to build businesses and grow the economy as a whole? Because I think we are the future.
Right. So Asanka, you can answer a question about VCs, how available they are for young entrepreneurs, like for an example. So 2048, if we are looking at expanding our country's economy, there has to be VCs coming in, angel investors, so on and so forth.
Okay. I have, raising funds is difficult everywhere. I've raised money in Silicon Valley, many rounds. No single round was easy because people are giving you money. They are not giving you. They are giving you money for return. You are doing it for passion. They are looking for return. So these things getting together is very difficult anywhere. Entrepreneurship in general is not for the light-hearted. So assume that it's going to be difficult. Jeff Bezos, this guy who runs Amazon, richest guy, 70% of the people said no for Amazon. Can you imagine that? Those 70 people, are kicking themselves from. But my point is, it's always difficult. But you're right, not having any kind of we only have commercial banks here, so you have to lease your house and at very high interest rates, and there's no cash flow possibility because the loan, once you take a loan, the payment is due that month itself, and no business can generate enough revenues to cover all of that within the month itself. It's got to be. That's why we have a lot of trade-related companies, like people who buy and sell immediately, so they can manage cash flow. And that is done for various reasons through the banking system. So, not so great news, hustle.
Yes, Shara, you have something.
But I wanted to add one point here. What we need is people like her. The next $40,000 is $1 trillion Sri Lankan economy at 25 million people, right? But there's many ways to get there. If we have 100,000 companies, just 100,000 companies doing $10 million a year in revenue, we are there. My book on the back says, I wrote this to find you. I am after you. After finding the 100,000 people, I actually care much less about him. Not personally, I care deeply about him. But my point is that 100,000 is what we are, and for you, sir, also, you nurture those 100,000 CEOs and maybe about another 10 people in their board of directors. That's still, far out of a 25 million population. You can find that talent. You can grow that talent. And $10 million in revenue is not outside of the realm of possibility for a company.
Asank, what a date has been you have been able to find now only 99,999. One is sitting just there.
Actually, there's even better news. There's at least 10,000 companies already there. Actually, I would structure this very differently. find companies that have $1 million in revenue, help them to get to 10 million.
Right. So Shahar, yes, you had something to say. There you go.
I agree with you a lot. Try looking outward also. Acumen Foundation might be a good lead for you. I'll talk to you later. But there is no venture capital, there are no development banks. There was a model, and there must be others, I know, but there was done, funded by NORAD and ADB, which was the Southern Development Bank, which is a very contrarian model. Contrarian because partly I injected ideas into it. But one of it was that government and the donor community would put a fund together, a kitty, which would be used for building small entrepreneurs and micro entrepreneurs. But the catch was that it was going to have a board of private sector entrepreneurs entirely, no bankers, nobody else, would take the risk, would give the guidance, and work almost like a venture capital company. So they would, like USAID has given a lot of the commercial banks risk guaranteed, credit guaranteed funding, which has not been passed on with the reduction of the risk. But this particular bank was going to be set up like that. Again, it got lost as usual between regime changes and bureaucracy.
Yes, Madam President, just if you could have a mic. Yes. There were banks, like DFCC Bank was built to help entrepreneurs, but unfortunately, now that has transformed into a commercial bank as well. Yes, yes.
Thank you. I was not supposed to take the time of everybody else, but because of what we've been talking just now about small and medium entrepreneurship, we did an experiment like this during the 94-2005 government. I don't know in the country around remember that. We call it Suratura Diriya Naya scheme, where I actually squeezed the throats of the two state banks to give loans to small and medium entrepreneurs at 5% interest when they were giving it at 22%. Because I found out that it cost them only 3% to give small loans, but they were giving it at 22%. So we designed this program, which didn't have a proper strategy, I must say. It was done very hurriedly. 500,000 people took up the challenge, young people, we said people had to be under 40 years. 500,000. All we did was we called for applications, of course, selected the feasible projects, and we trained groups in the two state banks. At that time, we worked only with the two state banks because the others were saying this and that, and I was in a hurry to get it done. Banking officers, they were trained by the central bank and the universities to go out and train these young people who were selected after they applied. They already had the skills for what they wanted to do, but they didn't have the financial management skills. I had noticed from my experience in the field, we did all kinds of projects before I came into politics directly, where they sort of tripped up was on the financial management part of it. So they were trained in that, brief training. And all these 500,000 projects went on for about 8-10 years, very successfully. Then there was a change of government in 2005. They went on for about 2 years and then they crashed because there was no interest from the government. So there is one example of a very big success, but there were lots of shortcomings. We didn't have the private sector on the board. We should have had a permanent kind of institution to manage it and mentor them. We just got this government did it through the banking officers, groups and all that. It didn't go further because we had been doing a war at the same time. So we didn't think of developing it more. So there is an experience like that, and we find young people, when they are encouraged, are very willing to come into it. And today I think we have the kind of ambience with lack of employment, cost of living going up, even what they earn is not enough. And quite a lot of people, even public servants, will be willing to do small and medium projects if they are encouraged, while they are doing another job.
Thanks a lot.
And one little thing, the 500,000 projects employ 2 million people. The UNDP has a report on that, on be successful.
I just want to get back to the book. I'll take another question, but I just want to quickly talk to Asanka about this aspect of the book. It says it strengthened our collective social backbone and it created an opening for our enlightened political leaders to tear down the race, religion, caste, status-based walls that kept us tumbling in the dark. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka's ethnic conflict, I think Dr. Salah would also be able to bear witness to it. It's over 4 decades since we had this war. It's been over 20 years now since the end of the conflict. We've still not been able to find a lasting solution to the reconciliation efforts that were ongoing. I think Kabir's government in 2016-2017 really rolled out the plan, but it didn't bear fruit. Moving forward, don't you think the wounds left behind by the conflict should be addressed also in the process of achieving these dreams that we have in mind?
Absolutely, thank you for that question. But let me get to that question on truth. What Madam President said is very true. These projects, it's absolutely there's young people. But one of the challenges is just giving money is not sufficient, because not only inspiration, actually just practical knowledge of managing cash flow, how to run your HR, being legal with all the HR requirements. If I started this business when I was younger, I would have probably crashed it. It will be a good learning, but I had 20 years of training in Silicon Valley on how to run multiple businesses. And that training is what I am actually most grateful for. And it is nothing to do with actually the tech itself, but the vast other parts of the business of how do you do R&D, how do you manage for budgets, how do you even manage executives in your team, right? Like occasionally even make a profit. That would be a good idea. So,
on the ethnic conflict and the resolution to that.
So, in the book I write about ethnic conflict and how do we live. You're absolutely right. In 2010, the idea was the South African model of truth and reconciliation. And because it actually worked for them, at least at that moment, and that was essentially kind of the model that I saw that people were pushing. But right now, what is happening is we are waiting for, frankly, to be bluntly, for people to die out. We are waiting for the people who have suffered to essentially pass away, so that we are hoping that the memories will be lost with them. Right? Because both sides on the more extreme sides of this argument are not willing for a compromise. Right? If you ask to put people who in the military in jail, that is a very difficult situation, because those are the people in power right now, and those military officers have come up through the chain of command. So that will be a very difficult negotiation.
Melasanga, I have to disagree with you on this.
But
If there is an issue, if there has to be someone to be behind bars, it has to happen. I'll tell you why. Because in 2006, when I was a budding journalist at that time, I went to the east of the country to cover the 13 Muslims who were murdered at that time. And I was the only Sri Lankan Muslim journalist to cover this from Arugambe at that time. And then I did not understand the severity of the war at that time and what the Tamil community was going through. But 2014, when the Alutkam incident took place, I was in Alutkam at that time, and as a Muslim, I felt fear, and jitters were running down my spine as a journalist at that time, thinking, how am I going to cover this?
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and as a result of that change happened of government in 2000.
What is the compromise you will come to? And what is the compromise you will come to?
There's no compromise.
Because if you look at it, there's blood spilled from all parties, and everybody has blood in their hands. Right? Every government head of state, we have asked them to the governments were voted. Let me be blunt and say, President Rajapaksa was voted to end the war. Vast majority of
Yeah,
the
but
community.
Asanga,
No, but my point is, we can use this, but the justice to the people who, our intellectual conversation is essentially preventing the people who have lost people from receiving any kind of closure.
this is a large conversation which, I don't think we're going to do justice, and I don't even want to wade in, but because you brought up, I think the most fundamental issues is if it is truth and reconciliation, which can be a can of worms. We have had total amnesia. We don't have it in our text at all. So we don't know about the JVP issue, we don't know about the 83 riots, we don't know about the 30-year war. It didn't happen. Come on. If you've lost people and you've had that kind of pain and sorrow, you need to admit it, you need to face it, and you need to, can't say sorry even, you need to at least look at the mirror of disquiet has to be held as a nation and have the discussion. The problem is we don't have the teachers and to be able to handle the conversations intelligently. I've written a playbook on this for Ranil and Sirisena, which was an exercise in futility, but that aside, there are examples all over the world of what has been done. I want to connect this about not having teachers with another folly that apparently one of our so-called more intelligent presidents, R.W. and his clan, brought in a 13th year vocational training because we were talking about entrepreneurship. And researchers showing, so he as usual just got it through. That was the 13th year in which entrepreneurship was being taught by people who were normally teaching geography or something else, hadn't ever run a business, hadn't ever walked into a place that knew anything, didn't know anything about anything. So what did they do? Because they weren't being given even 5 cents extra for this particular curriculum, which had been nicely crafted by a few corporate people and funding from donors with the UN and all helping as to what entrepreneurship is. The geography teachers decided to tell the kids, this is this is not going to get you anywhere in life. Please don't study this. This is going to be very difficult for you. And somehow got attendance to fall completely. In the research, they said the teachers basically having no skill set, having no incentive to take on one additional program, it totally failed. And time again, we get some graduates of people to teach people vocational training who haven't a clue about anything that it takes to run a business. So teaching, curriculum, TOT, so much has to go into these things. Playbooks.
I just want to add one just thought before we move on to the next question. When the burial issue took place in 2020 during COVID, where the Muslims were burnt after dying of COVID, there was only a simple sorry from the government. A simple sorry, what does it do? Does it do any good? So I leave it at that. Yes. Yes.
Hi there, thanks for the great chat. So my name is Tarika. I just want to add a little part about the FDI and the knowledge that you guys want to bring in. And that topic about reconciliation. Part of the diaspora, I grew up in New Zealand. And there's a lot of people still having their hatred, but they want to come back and support. We're actually building infrastructure to do that. It's called Project Roots. We're also working with another organization called Aram, who's focusing on the Tamil diaspora coming back in. And we have visions to merge and figure out how we bring that back in. We're currently facing visa issues. People either running on tourist visas to come in, or they're running on business visas. We know there's the ex-Sri Lankan dependence visa. We're hoping that we can get permanent residency as a stepping stone to dual citizenship, so we can get more conversions in. I feel like that's not being, that policy's been passed but not implemented. So I'd love to chat with the Department of Immigration or Public Security on that. But also I feel like we're getting youth hyped to come back and they're seeing Sri Lanka's potential. I'd love for us to use that value proposition that someone else said to push that. And we've got hubs all around the world, so I'd just love to hear if there's any way that we can kind of bring that talent back and retain it. So
Asanga, or even Kabir.
I think
I don't want to, I honestly don't want to point the finger at Iran to answer that question because Iran, this time it's not on me, okay? Come here. Iran, yes. So after this question, we will wrap up. I just want to listen to the thoughts of the three panelists at the end as to what their way forward is. If Kabir has a message to the government, he could do so at this forum. So let's go with Iran as final answer to this question.
Yes, I was very glad to hear that issue being raised about human resources and visas and things like that, because when the panel discussed it and the 2048 picture, one of the issues was aging population, dependency rates going up, and Sri Lanka might be facing an issue. So on that issue, we are never going to be able to compete with the rest of the world at the low end. It's only at the valuated end. Therefore, every Sri Lankan child has to have a higher education. And that can be vocational training, professional training, university, whatever. The system has to be open. Government alone cannot be the supplier. It will just not work. And we have to be radical about it. And on the human resource issue, I made a comment the other day saying that I won't give a three-wheeler driving license to anybody under 35 years. There's a huge reaction from the industry, and the trade union leader slammed me, but he had the decency to call me. We had a conversation, and at the end of the conversation, he said, but after he had slammed me, he said, but you must have had a reason. I said, yes. Do you have a child? He said, yes, 18 years. I said, 17 years from now, your child will be 35, and there will not be a job to drive a vehicle like that. He said, what? Because I said, I'll go to the road, I'll get into the vehicle, I'll just put where I'm going, the vehicle will take me, and the job won't be there. And then he said to me, I'm really glad you told me that. He withdrew every single comment on the social media criticizing what I had said. It is not about controlling an industry, it's about Sri Lanka's advantages. One is location, the other is human resources, and we have to develop human resources. And going to the point that was made there, that we need to be radical. Sri Lanka has one of the largest expatriate populations in the world as a percentage of the population. I will give every Sri Lankan, first generation who's gone abroad, I'll give them dual citizenship. Make them feel welcome in this country. Because those Sri Lankans living abroad, I'm generalizing here, have very high education levels, relatively speaking. Right? They have investments, right? Savings that could be brought back here. Second and third generation, I give them permanent residency. They have not been born here. They have been born there. They have studied there. They have gone very high up in the networks in those countries. They are the people who could bring the networks here. They are the people who could actually translate this FDI question. They can translate. I said this in some place and somebody said, how much are you going to charge them? I said $1. They missed the point completely. It's about human resources. This is the advantage that we have. And I would say, well, the visas that was mentioned here, even the golden visa system. Sri Lanka should open the golden visa system, even for others to come here. It can be controlled. We are bound. Our main constraint in developing this country is a mental constraint. It's not an economic constraint, it's a mental constraint. And those things can be managed. The concerns can be managed. Somebody told me, oh, but the LTD might come back through your scheme. I said, don't talk nonsense, because every individual will be screened. And we have to get out of these mental constraints, and even the golden visa system should be open. So I'm completely, I would say, human resources is number one.
Thanks, Iran. Maybe the journalist I am, Iran, I want to ask you one final question. We're not going to win our next World Cup. Is it anytime soon? Right. So anyway, I want to give the three speakers an opportunity to wrap up, just 2 minutes each. But I want to ask a question from Kabir. Kabir, nowhere in the world has a country been not defaulted the second time. If you look at Greece, if you look at Argentina, all these countries have defaulted the second time after declaring bankruptcy once. is Sri Lanka going to be bankrupt again? Is it on the cards? Because Dr. Sarah spoke about 2029 being able to speak to IMF and try to renegotiate the deals that we have done. What is the way forward for Sri Lanka given this context as we speak?
Well, there have been many countries that have defaulted more than once. There could be a likelihood of Sri Lanka going into default because of setbacks that have happened with the global economy, with the war in the Middle East, which are actually beyond our control. In fairness, the government can't do anything about it. But even if we are to go into a default, we could restructure our repayments. We could go into a managed, informed default rather than what we did last time. Okay? Because it was a forced default, right? We didn't pay back. But you can always negotiate with the IMF and restructure. I would have felt that we actually have to have a negotiation with the IMF and reset our targets, because it has some challenges right now. And I think Sri Lanka can get to being vulnerable within the course of this year. It's quite possible, and what Dr. Sarah said is quite right, and we should start getting prepared for that scenario whilst we work on Asanka's dream. And that both put together will take us somewhere.
Thanks, Dr. Kabir. Shahara, your final thoughts.
So first a comment really on Iran. I'm glad you were so passionate about it. I think a diaspora strategy is essential for youth. India has some brilliant programs for the diaspora, and we could copy some of them. Malaysia too has a talent cooperation visa. In fact, I was given a 10-year visa, carte blanche, and said, come back anytime and work. No question, money given. But anyway, Sri Lanka's hope is really human capital development, essentially. And to do that, we have to look at every possible success story anywhere in the region or on. The TVEC sector, certainly, and German tech has been a brilliant example of good investment. We need to get more like that from credible investors like that. Tertiary education, the US has made a lot of money with attracting human capital after having really bad secondary and primary education. They suddenly really up their game at tertiary level, and we have pretty good, despite all our flaws, pretty good secondary and primary education. But we really need to skill up both in terms of the pay scales, the professional development of our teachers, put emphasis there on the funding for it from GDP, and then attract foreign strategic partnerships in education and possibly position Sri Lanka for a brain port. Apart from that, I think we have to look at strategic investments where there will be an amplifier effect in terms of our economy, in terms of driving FDI, and to look at the lowest hanging fruit there, which can go beyond services, and certainly looking at really having crafted public-private partnerships in terms of how we bring some of the big international players, particularly the tech sector, where we are envisaging a 10% contribution of GDP with digitalization, and that will bring some of the lower end into the official from the informal sector.
Right, Asanka, your final thoughts. Keep it brief, 2 minutes.
Absolutely. I hope you guys are all feeling a little bit like this 40,000 is possible. Yeah. Okay, good. Actually, my goal is to have all political parties. In 4 years from now, we will have a presidential election. And I hope all major candidates who run for that have, I think 3 to 4 years from now, there will be a presidential election. I hope and I am going to fight for that all major presidents who are political parties present a plan for $40,000. I'm sorry, sir, this is 20,000 trying to get away is not good. We need a plan. You have an entire institution and 4 years to work on it. So work on it, present a plan, present a credible plan, and encourage the JVP, all the political parties to have their own version. That's totally cool. and people, all these people can read, and we'll vote on the good plan to go. But we need a plan. There is no plan right now, and I want to urge that this is actually a plan. This is put in 3 steps in this book. One is education. Everybody said we have to up our skills game and talent game. Second is our energy game. When economies grow, they grow linearly in energy consumption. And if we don't have our energy problem solved, we cannot grow the economy. Even if you have smart people, you still need electricity. Right? So we need to get that game, and that game is not you just open up a thing. It's a 25-year game to improve our grades, put smart grades, all of that. And the third thing is climate change. It's not going to wait for us. We have been warned before, so let's get our act together. And I really thank all of you being such an amazing audience and engaging this. And I hope you wait and harass all our leaders even more to get these plans going.
So thank you very much, Asanka Dimel, founder and CEO of the Dovi Ceylon brand, Kabir Hashim, Member of Parliament, and also Shehara De Silva. Thank you very much, Iran Vikramatne, and also Dr. Sarah, for answering most of the questions. It was a pleasure to have the two of you in the audience today as well. And thank you very much for being such a great audience today. And it was lovely to have all of those questions being taken.